Good evening, good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to COZ 23. Before we start the meeting today, I'm going to ask Charles Heller to say a few words to you on a very special subject. Charles.
Thank you, Geraldine. Welcome, everybody. We were sorry to hear a few days ago the passing of cantor Danny Gildar in the States. And I just wanted to say a few words. I worked with Danny on and off various occasions. I just want to share a few memories. One occasion was in Miami in the 90s. I don't know if you can see this. Let me see. There we go. Danny Gildar in about 1990 in Miami. Danny Gildar was a cousin, but he was also the go-to accompanist of his generation, I think. I just want to share two things about him. One, there's a wonderful video that was made in the late 1980s by Chaim Wiener of Miami when he took a group of chazanim to the Soviet Union, and including Misha Alexandrovich, Louis Danto, Bagley, and many others. And Danny was the accompanist. So you can see his fine work on this video if you get hold of this video. The other memory I have is, of course, that Danny was the regular accompanist at the Cantors Convention, Cantors Assembly annual conventions, which are usually held in the Catskills in the old days. And one of the highlights of the convention was that every evening there would, late in the evening, there would be a kind of open mic session where anybody wanted to sing anything would show up. And you'd have a whole stream of chazanim, the great chazanim and students. Anybody wanted to sing anything. And of course, Danny knew every piece. So whatever you came up and wanted to sing, Danny would know it. So he would be par excellence as well as being a great pianist. He was a great accompanist. And I have this amazing memory of one particular evening in the 80s when this is, can you, wait, oh, here we go. This is Chazan Shmuel Vigoda in his, I don't know, he was in his 90s or something. And one evening he was sitting there in the jam session and he gets up to sing, and Danny accompanied it. This is Vigoda in his 90s somewhere singing. I have a photograph of this. I don't know if you can see this. This is people sitting about 11 o'clock at night, and in the middle, in the back, is Chazan Vigoda, and there's Danny looking barefoot, completely bemused, going to accompany him. And there's a handful of people there because nobody knew. And as soon as the word got out that Chazan Vigoda was singing, the room filled up. But in a few minutes, there were 1,000 people packed into this room. So that was a wonderful memory I have. And somewhere, somebody, I don't know if you know about this, somebody must have a recording. For sure, somebody has a recording. So it'd be wonderful to know if anybody has a recording of this. So that was my memories of Danny, who was, one of the irreplaceable. Thank God we have many wonderful accompanists today, Raymond and so on. But Danny was somebody special of his generation. So Zichro Baruch, and we should have good memories of him.
Thank you very much, Charles. And I'm sure that everybody has a special memory of Daniel Gildar, the accompanist of choice all over the world for so many years. And I'm sure you'll all want to reflect briefly on cantor Daniel, an accompanist, a pianist, musician, Daniel Gildar. Thanks so much. So let's go. Subject for today, where we're discussing synagogue music before Sulzer. Daniel Katz is an American musicologist, composer, and rabbi living in Germany, specialist in the history of synagogue music, especially around the 1800s. So he is going to be having a conversation today with Dr. Boaz Tarsi. Tarsi, as everybody knows, is a respected scholar of the theory of Jewish prayer music, as well as an oft-performed composer, and he is an associate professor of the Jewish Theological Seminary. So I'm going to hand over to possibly to Boaz, who's going to start the session by asking Daniel some questions. Who remembers the melodies of the 56th century, he asks, which is basically 1740 to 1840. But over to you, Boaz and Daniel. We look forward to hearing from you.
Thanks, Geraldine. Today, for a change, I may not really talk much. I'll just manage and host Daniel, who is going to actually present a lot, or at least part of the kind of work that he does. I just would like to probably frame it that I know in my own work, I find that the exploring the historiography of this field tells me a lot about all of these issues that we have discussed in previous meetings, and all the confusion and lack of clarity and all the different opinions about what Nusach is, what Steiger, what mode is, and we inherited a whole bunch of, I guess, sort of a mess from the previous generations. And I find that the key to clarifying all these things is actually looking at those historical sources. And this is not for today, but maybe in my own work, if I find time to do this, make the connection between what was then and how it affects what's now. Plus, it also, understanding that also points to the solution of how we can actually clarify all these things that seem so problematic, and as we actually witnessed in previous sessions, that those things need to be resolved. So even so far as this is concerned, it's worth taking a look at the earlier discourse and music, even though this session, of course, is going to be more academic, but let's keep in mind the practical implications that we can draw from it, which I guess we'll have to do another time. For starters, it's important to be familiar with what was then. Plus, Daniel has some ideas about what things, even so far as practical implementation, what we can actually still keep from those early sources, and of course, what is no longer doable. Again, in my work, I think that there is also a key to trying to figure out what they were trying to do, not just by what kind of music, but what kind of experience were they trying to imbue the service with, and to try to keep that and translate it to our contemporary current aesthetics and time values. But again, in order to do that, we have to figure out those sources and that historiography and those earlier roots of what we're actually practicing now. And so with that introduction, I'll just turn over to Daniel, who just introduced most of it. I think, Daniel, is part of the research work that you do. And I'll just let you take it, and every once in a while I may intersperse or have some questions, etc. So Daniel, the stage is yours.
Okay, thank you. And please don't hesitate to jump in and make a comment or ask a question. We're going to be talking about the 56th century. We're going back to the 56th century. And for all practical purposes, Chazanut for us begins in 1840 with Sulzer. It's very rare that we hear anything or we sing anything in shul that is older than 1840. Now, I know someone will say, well, the Mycenite tunes are older than 1840, and I'll be talking a little bit about the Mycenite tunes. I am not convinced that the Mycenite tunes are medieval. That's really not our topic for tonight. Our topic for tonight will include the fact that we have notations for the Mycenite tunes from the 18th century and not earlier, but before Sulzer. We have Rossi, which of course is 200 years older than Sulzer, but that is neither traditional nor cantorial nor Ashkenaz. So Sulzer, of course, did not come out of nowhere. There were really three different styles, at least, of chazonas in Sulzer's time. There was Sulzer. And when we look at the 18th century, we will find out why it was necessary to reform synagogue music, even though we might regret some and some lost through that process. But we had Sulzer, we had reform style hymns modeled after Lutheran hymns. We had still, as Jeffrey Goldberg, who's on the call tonight here, has shown in his book with the compendium of Meyer Levy of Esslingen, a chazan who's grappling with tradition and modernity and how to represent tradition in a new style while keeping as much as possible. And of course, we have Kashtan and his son, Hirsch Weintraub, who lives until 1881, I think, carrying on also parts of the older tradition in new clothing, we can say. So the importance of the 56th century is, first of all, that it takes us back. It gives us a context for Sulzer. Sulzer is not coming out of nowhere. But it also shows us what was going on before, what Sulzer was reacting to. And it is itself, no less than the 19th century, a time of change. The 18th century is historically the first period for which we have a large collection of sources. We have our first corpus of cantorial manuscripts. I'm talking about Ashkenazi music. So 3 things that are crucial. It's Ashkenazi, it is a corpus, and it is cantorial. So we have individual notations of synagogue song going back to the 12th century. That is to say, from the Geniza around 1120, we have 2 folios, one in Cambridge, England, one at JTS, notated in a Gregorian chant notation by a convert to Judaism. This is an anomaly. It is the only music we have from that period, and we have to wait quite a long time before we have anything comparable to it. It's, of course, very important as the sole witness to that time. And cantorial, oh yes, I should also mention the German humanistic sources. Our first notations for Ta'ameh Mikra are from Bavarian humanists in the 16th century. Johannes Reuchlin is the most famous name. We also have from them a Zur Michelot, which is perfectly singable, but it's a single piece. It doesn't show us a trend. It doesn't show us what's going on generally. It is simply one piece of music from that time. This is cantorial music. It's not classically composed music. So it's not Rossi. It's not what Israel Adler called la musique pratique savante, the learned style of the learned practice of music in the synagogue. Composers like Lidarti, who wrote an oratorio in Hebrew about Esther, and Israel Adler, for his dissertation, presented a large number of extant, maybe about 20 compositions that are extant from the 17th and 18th centuries by classical composers. So this is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about cantorial manuscripts written by cantors or by their assistant singers, basically for their own use, which is perhaps unfortunate because they didn't take us into account, and that means we have to struggle sometimes to figure out what they meant. We're lucky that some of this material and a lot of this material survived. We know that a lot of material didn't survive, and things survived, well, mostly because of the Birnbaum collection, which is an enormous collection of cantorial music at Hebrew Union College, Cincinnati. Birnbaum was cantor in Königsberg from the 1880s until 1920 when he died. And it is very fortunate that his collection got transferred to Cincinnati. Otherwise, it probably would have been lost. The collection, he inherited much material from his predecessor, Hirsch Weintraub, and Hirsch Weintraub's manuscripts include materials from his father, Kashtan. Whether there are manuscripts from Kashtan or whether there's just music by Kashtan in Hirsch's manuscripts is not quite clear to me at this point, but this is the basis for Birnbaum's collection. Birnbaum added to it enormously. To give you some extent, to give you some idea of the extent of this collection, it has been microfilmed. The manuscripts and indices alone, not counting printed books in the collection, take up 72 reels of microfilm. Much of this has been digitalized. A little bit is on the website of HUC and can be downloaded. But there's a lot more that's been digitalized. I think that's not there. I think Mark Kligman probably knows more about this, but it's work in progress, and this has been the basis of my work. We have some publications that present materials that allow scholars to have an overview, to look at these materials. The first one is Edelson's Thesaurus, Hebrew of Hebrew Oriental melodies, as he called it, but volume 6 is German melodies of the 18th century. And although he refers to an Ashkenazi compilation for around 1600, he does not explain where it is or if it's still extant, and it might have been extant when he was writing 100 years ago and have disappeared in the interim. I don't know. But he gives notes, he transcribes lots of music, and we will be looking at some of it today. About half of what I'm going to show you today is from Edelson's collection. Most of what I'm going to show you is from the Birnbaum collection, and we'll look at one piece by Offenbach. The other great collection is the Isaac Offenbach collection, which is also at HUC, but in New York. Offenbach was cantor in Cologne until he died in 1850. And thank goodness his collection, his manuscripts were survived. This is the father, of course, of Jacques Offenbach, the composer. It has been said that a lot of Isaac's synagogue music is to be found today in Jacques' operas. Would be a wonderful dissertation topic for somebody who is thoroughly familiar with Jacques' operas and then takes a look at Isaac's manuscripts. Yes.
One comment, just to clarify to people about the Edelson collection. First of all, even in the name that he named it, Oriental, there was this agenda that everything Jewish sort of relates to or originated in the Middle East, even the Ashkenazi, that's part of his agenda. We also need to take into account that the thesaurus, when it comes to stuff outside of Ashkenaz, Edelson really based it on his research, recordings, etc., field work. But his Ashkenazi stuff is mostly just reprinting of written sources that he actually encountered, supplementing it with his own knowledge and with his own versions, and even sometimes I think, things that he knew about Ashkenaz. In other words, when it came to Ashkenaz, he either actually just rewrote written sources that he knew were not fieldwork or were not his, they were composed by somebody he knows, yes, or that he treated himself as an informant. In other words, I am Ashkenazi, and so some of the stuff is just his. And of course, I just want to mention just briefly that the 6th volume is very enigmatic, as you will see. A lot of this music sounds like bad Vivaldi or some kind of Baroque Rococo style. There are a few explanations. Some of them Daniel will explain, and some of it we have also the different explanations of what that really was. It's very different from what we recognize most of. Not all of it. Sometimes, as you'll see, we recognize things that we actually do know from the 19th century and the present, but a lot of it is still enigmatic.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. So Edelson was an ethnomusicologist. He recorded a lot of material, and then he transcribed a lot of manuscripts, which was very important in the 1920s and 30s because people wouldn't have had access to it otherwise. We have much better access to materials today because we can travel and we have the internet. But Edelson made a lot of this available and allowed a lot of people to take a first glance at this material. Let's move on to the sources themselves now. Well, one other compilation that I should mention, aside from Edelson, is Rhythm. which is an abbreviation for Répertoire International des Sources Musicales, in English, International Repertory of Musical Sources, which is a standard musicological reference work that usually centers around Western European music. And Israel Adler was the first musicologist who got something non-Western and non-European into this, namely Hebrew notated manuscript sources. And actually they are Western European. They're largely from Germany and from Austria. But it was the first time that the musicological world had acknowledged the validity of non-Christian, well, I won't say it's the first time they acknowledged the validity of it, but to put Hebrew sources into this catalog was a major step forward. And he has over 200 manuscripts. Over half of them are from the Birnbaum collection. Almost, maybe 80% are from Birnbaum and Offenbach together. He has a short section on manuscripts that we know about but have been lost, which is also very important. And he gives inventories. He gives you the manuscript. He gives you the first few notes of every item in the manuscript. So if you want to research music, this is the first place to go. He's got indices, so you can look up liturgical names and then see where they are set and go straight to the manuscripts and see what sort of settings I have. This goes up to 1840. In other words, 1120 to 1840. He's including, of course, Obadiah, the source. Now the historical sources. Ashkenazi synagogue music, for all practical purposes, begins in Hanover, Germany in 1744 with the Hanover Compendium, a manuscript containing over 300 pieces of music. Unfortunately, it disappeared in the Shoah. Fortunately, the music director of the German community of Berlin, Arno Nadel, published a few of the pieces, 18 pieces he published in German publications before the Shoah. So we have, unfortunately, only 18, but at least we have them. The cantor Aaron Baer, born in Bamberg, Germany in 1738, died in Berlin in 1821, and spent most of his career as cantor in Berlin, wrote 2 enormous manuscripts, one of which, the larger of which, has been lost. It contained over 1,200 items, 1,210 items. Birnbaum copied out 11 of these, complete. So we have those pieces, and he wrote out 26 incipits of other pieces. So we have just a small amount of this very large manuscript. However, he wrote out another manuscript with over 400 pieces. This manuscript exists, and we will look at some of these pieces today. This manuscript is from 1791. Baer sometimes names composers of the pieces that he presents, and sometimes he doesn't. They may well be his own compositions. Joseph S. Goldstein, we will look at. He wrote a manuscript with 130 pieces from 1813, more or less. He was in Bavaria, not far from Meyer Levy and Esslingen. And we have some very interesting material in his manuscripts. I'm going to show you some pieces from Denmark. We normally don't think of Denmark in connection with Chazanut. We should, because Sulzer's rabbi came from Denmark. And I don't know whether Sulzer's rabbi knew of what I'm going to show you or not. It is horrendous, but the Lechadodi is perfectly singable. It's no worse than anything else that we use. This is from 1825. And the 2 big composers I've already mentioned, Isaac Offenbach, who died in 1850, who was in Cologne, and Kashtan, cantor Solomon, the son of Shimshon, and the father of Hirsch Weintraub. I'm very carefully not calling him Solomon Kashtan or Solomon Weintraub, because neither Kashtan nor Weintraub was his last name. Apparently, he didn't have a last name, as far as I can tell. Most Jews around 1800 in Eastern Europe didn't have last names, and it took the Russian government a long, long time to impose the minhag of last names on the Jewish population. So Weintraub is the son's name, probably not at all the father's, and Kashtan is a nickname that he had, that he was given by a cantor he sang with and traveled around with, starting at the age of 9. So the initial research, going back 100 years, Birnbaum himself made use of his collection. He wrote out indices, he made notations, he examined what was there. RISM, I already mentioned, the catalog, the musicological catalog by Adler, by Israel Adler, Hebrew notated manuscript sources, and Edelson's Thesaurus. Edelson wrote an article called Song and Singers of the 18th Century, which was published, well, in the 1920s. That's 100 years old, but that's the first overview that we have of this material. I will mention Avenary's article on the cantorial fantasia, a genre that he identified based on Nisinai tunes, but spun out into virtuosic larger pieces, published in the very first Yuval in 1968. And Jeffrey Goldberg has continued this research with the cantorial fantasia revisited in Musica Judaica almost 20 years ago, 2003 to 2004, what, 15 years ago. The style of the music we're about to see. It is Baroque, it is Rococo, it is classical, it is anything but what we stereotypically think of as Jewish. There may be a couple of passages in a Hava Rabbah. Mostly it will not be. We'll see major, mostly major, some minor, some Phrygian. It will be wild, it will be virtuosic. It will be with a range of 2 octaves, or in one case, 2 octaves and a third, with fast passage work, instrumental imitations. It can include nusach, and it can include mishorarim, assistant singers. So a zinger, which would be a boy soprano, and a bass surrounding the cantor and filling in. My research over the last 25 years has centered around the 56th century. From my first article in Journal of Synagogue Music in 1994, which dealt with the study of the mishorarim, when I looked at manuscripts from the Birnbaum collection and analyzed how they are used in manuscripts that mention them. And one of the big problems is that the manuscripts do not give us anywhere near the information that we need. I'm going to show you 11 examples. If we have time, I have a couple more, but I'm not going to count on it. Most of these examples are very short, so we'll have no problem, I think, fitting them all in and hearing them and talking about them. And you will see from the start what some of the problems are. The stylistic elements that I mentioned, we will see in various pieces. I will point out some of them as we go along. I will make reference to my own work, and I will summarize my work at the end. So right now, I am going to share my screen. And we will look at a manuscript. Do you all see some music? I didn't hear that. Can somebody
Yes.
Yes, okay, thank you.
Yes, yes.
Thank you, thank you. Excuse me. Our first example goes all the way back to the beginning. This is from the Hanover Compendium of 1744. So this is one of the earliest pieces that we have. And as you can see, it looks very Baroque. Passages such as this one here and this one look like, for example, the Handel Sonatas Opus 1. You could play this on a flute, on the violin, on some instrument. We do have music here. Many of you will recognize and well, that's not quite what he wrote, but that is the melody. So this is Octamut. It's a setting of Octamut. I discussed it in great detail in my CA Zoom lecture a couple of months ago. I'm not going to go into that now, but just to show that there is some nusach here. Notice also there's no text. This will be a very common theme. We have no idea how the words were to be matched to the music. So this is, if we didn't know that this was synagogue music, and if we didn't recognize Octamut, we probably would never know it. Now, we might recognize Octamut because in the manuscript it says that this is Octamut. Well, I'm not sure if that's true because I haven't seen this manuscript because it's lost. But the other manuscripts where we have similar settings will say, we'll give a heading Octamut. Otherwise, you might never know it unless you recognized a motive. So this is what we have here. La 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 la. La 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 pam 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 pam. La pa pa ta la 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 la. La 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 la. So it's a very typical piece of its time. Only the motives connected for us to the synagogue. We move on to Bear, to Aaron Bear, if I can find it. Yes. Now, the first thing I want to show you is the contents, is the table of contents. Are you still seeing the screen? I can't hear you.
Yes, can see this.
Yes, I'm seeing,
okay.
I'm seeing an Edelson's screen.
Okay, thank you. This is the table of contents of Edelson Volume 6. And let's look at the left-hand column at the pieces that he's transcribing. Lecho dodi his orari malchuscho kedusho. Lecho dodi his orari malchuscho. Lecho dodi his orari malchuscho. Lecho dodi his orari malchuscho. Lecho dodi his orari malchuscho, etc., etc. He keeps setting the same pieces over and over and over again. If we look at the Hebrew, at the left part of the Hebrew, Parashat Bereshit, Lechododi Parshat Noach, Parshat Lech Lecha, Parshat Vayera. He's going through the whole liturgical year and writing a new Lecha Dodi for every week. He writes that it is dreadful the way people in the congregation try to sing along with the cantor. And if you hear a melody only once, then you can't learn it and sing along and spoil the whole thing. So he gives us a lechadodi, and with the lechadodi, a hisorari and a malchuso, and occasionally something else for every parasha. And if you are ever getting bored by having the same lechadodi every week, then here is your opportunity to have more lechadodis than you'll ever know what to do with in a lifetime. One other thing I'd point out Waldhorn Margot. In fact, there were two Waldhorn Margos. This one is for Hanukkah. Actually, they're both for Hanukkah. I won't talk about Waldhorn, but I want to talk briefly about Margot, or just mention that one of the peculiarities of the 56th century is that occasionally you get pieces that are labeled Margot. You might ask what that means. And I asked the same thing, and Israel Adler asked the same thing, and everybody asks the same thing. We don't know what Margot means. There is such a genre as Margot. Obviously, one thinks of Largo, but how Largo would become Margot, I don't know. So this is one of the interesting and amusing open questions that we have about the repertory. Now let's look at Lechadodi. This is for Parashat Noach. I don't think there's anything musical in the piece that would in any way indicate that this is for Parashat Noach, but it is for Parashat Noach. So it's a lovely little 18th century minuet, typical of the style. No idea how the text is to be set. I mean, we can make some attempts. Lechadodi likrat kala Pnei Shabbat Nikabla. Probably not, but who knows? Whether it is sung once or sung twice, whether the verse is in the first half and the second, the refrain in the second half, or the other way around, we can only experiment and see what seems to us to work. Unfortunately, it means that I know when I'm trying this music out that almost everything that I do with it is going to be wrong. And as a result, I try in my transcriptions and performances to be ultra conservative and not to take too many steps, even though I suspect that by being ultra conservative, I'm holding myself back and doing things that also are probably wrong. But I think it's necessary to try to step into it gradually. At any rate, it's a lovely little minuet, a delightful tune, probably not something with this range that you want to sing with the congregation. We're going to look at two other lechadodis, and one of them is down here. Lechadodi, so the Hebrew abbreviation, Mi Reb Moshe Pan. Moshe Pan was one of the composers whose work often appears here in Bear's compilation. Edelson thinks Pan may refer to the town of Peine in Lower Saxony. And this one is for Parashat Lech Lecha. It's got a somewhat different mood. It's an andante. La 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 la. La 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 la. la 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 la. La 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 So maybe more of an Irish or Scottish feel for legato D. Still a binary form. This time the B is twice as long as the A, but very similar in style. Now, just because it's here, I will show you the his orrery that goes with it. Lam pam pam pa la 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 lam pam pi dum ti ti di ti di ti ti di ti ti di ti ti di da 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 di ti ti di ti la la lam pa pi di ti 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 di ti ti di ti di. And just to calm things down, we have an andante after that. So we have the full panoply of classical movements here. We'd be doing very nicely if we tried to make a string quartet or a symphony out of this, thinking of Mozart or Haydn. Hard to imagine how you sing something like this in the synagogue, but apparently this is what Bear was doing. One final legato D. This is legato D, Le Shabbat Chanukah, Parashat Miketz. Na di 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 ti ti di di ti ti di 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 ti di 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 ti di 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 ti 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 di 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 ti 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 di 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 ti 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 di Well, it's a nice change from the Germanic Ma'oz Tzur that we all sing. Doesn't seem to be anything particularly relevant to Hanukkah, but I would just point out at the beginning, there is a tune associated with Hanukkah, which has the same beginning, a slightly different rhythm, and you'll recognize the tune in a minute when I sing a little bit more of it. So from Joshua and Judas Maccabeus by Handel, I doubt very much. First of all, I don't know. This is still, I don't know if Baer would have known Judas Maccabeus, and that's in 4. Judas Maccabeus is in 4, or the Victory March is in 4. This is in 3. This is not a dotted rhythm. So it may just be a coincidence here that we have the same first 4 notes. At any rate, another typical Lechado D from this time. Now, we looked at one hit orrery already. I'm going to give you another hit orrery because this has something special in it, namely 2 notes at a time. So we have Meshorerim here. We also have a 4-note chord. And at the end, we have a series of 2-note chords. So it's clear that the cantor is singing with either 1 or maybe 3 other singers. Or now, who knows if maybe this would be if the singer would repeat those A's in the next 2 measures, even though they're not written. I don't know. Brum, 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 brum. So you can imagine this being played on a violin. The lowest note is G, and an open G. This makes a very nice violin chord, as does this. But somehow it becomes a hit orrery, showing us the use of the Meshorerim, and the fact that they're only written in a couple of places does not mean that they didn't appear somewhere else, but we just don't know. So, you know, if I'm transcribing it, I'm probably going to be writing just what is written here, and maybe asking the question: we have 2 singers singing here, and we have 2 singers singing here. Are there 2 more singers who join this piece just for this 1 measure? Or does one of the singers go ba-dum and sing 2 notes? And again, I can ask a lot of questions, but I really cannot answer very many. So we move on from hit orrery to Malchusecha. And as you can imagine, we do not have any text for Malchusecha, but we certainly have more than our share of notes. So this is for Parashat Vayeshev, although I must say Vayeshev means to sit, and the cantor is doing anything but sitting in this piece. Once again, it is very instrumental in form. It could be played on the violin. We've got a low G again. This is a typical instrumental figuration. I think from the mood of this piece, it would work just as well on the cello. It is a range of, what is the range? The range is an octave and a major. The range is 2 octaves from G to G. So not something you want to sing with your congregation.
Daniel?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I would just like to interject one clarification and one comment. When Malchutecha means Malchutecha ra'u banecha bokeh hayam lifnei Moshe.
That's my assumption, yes.
Okay, so before, I just want to comment on the Lechado Ds. I'm not much for speculating about whatever it is, but I think that the important thing that we can draw from it, and something that is a fact, is that they're all in 3/4. And that is important when we try to explore the modal framework, even of later on, and even of things that are, so to speak, nusach. That Lecha Dodi is in 3/4. It's something that I'm not going to elaborate on it now, but it's significant, and it's something that is a fact that we can clearly draw from this.
Okay, thank you very much. That's a very fine point. I would have to check first if the other 50 settings of Lecha Dodi are also all in 3/4. Certainly the ones that we've seen now are, and the one we're going to see from Aarhus is also in 3/4. So that does give us a new insight. And if you take Lecha Dodi as a minuet or as a waltz, that's a different feeling from what we normally bring to it.
There is,
yes?
I don't want to elaborate on this. There is more to it than I just said. I just wanted people
Yes.
to take note. But part of
Yes.
it has, of course, with the meter itself of the text, and part of it, the Lecha Dodis that are now done freely, of course, could be anything. But something about the tradition of doing something in that meter is part of the modal framework that we're talking about.
Yes, yes, definitely. So let's look at the Malchutecha. Señor. So here we actually have three sections, going into the relative minor in the third section, and then a repeat of the second section. So it's an A, B, C, B form, more elaborate than the Lecha Dodi, very instrumental, as I said. One of the questions here is, what do we make of the accidentals? I sang the C sharp holding through all the way to here. because it seems to make more sense that way, but it is not written. Let's move on to Joseph Goldstein. Goldstein was writing in the 1790s in Bavaria, and he gives us a Messinae tune, a Yiskadal, for the Musaf Kaddish for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And what I've marked in red are various points that I want to discuss, touching on the style and the Nusach, because when we have a Musaf Kaddish for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we're expecting a certain Nusach, and we certainly have it. So we start here with this open octave. Avenari points out that this is a very typical statement of a chord at the beginning. And then we have this theme here. La da da ti ri ti ri ti ri ti ri ri ti ri, in sequence. Ti ri ri ti ri 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 ri, with a repetition which anticipates the motive where the text comes in, where it is expanded. And we also see an expansion. Let's see. No, I'll get to that later. This figuration, these repeated notes, the double slashes indicate that we're singing sixteenths here. So 8/16 on each of these halves is a typical stylistic feature of Goldstein, apparently. And we go down to a low A, and we go up to a high C. So this marks, fortunately, right next to each other in the manuscript, right, or above and below each other, the extremes of the range. This piece is 2 octaves and a minor third. Here is our opening. Now, today a cantor is more likely to sing Yitkadash. There are a number of different possibilities in the older Nusach. This is, so without the sharp, it sounds less like Kol Nidre here, but it is still a related motive. And since I know Jeffrey Goldberg is here on Zoom, he has pointed out in his book that the corresponding Kaddish by Meir Levi very closely resembles this one by Goldstein. Has so many of these similar motives, which draw from a typical stock of Chazanic motives of this period. But the relationship, to Levi shows how this is carried over into the mid-19th century. It is found in many other settings. There are a number of aspects here that you'll find, for example, in the Ravel Kaddish. Now, Ravel took some Nusach and set it to music, and that is, of course, later in the 19th century, but from an Eastern European perspective, many of these motives, such as this here, Yisbarach Yishtabach, are found in a variety of settings. We get a fanfare, and then la da 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 dee dum. This Phrygian cadence, li di 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 di, is our first direct connection to Yom Kippur, where we would have in the Kol Nidre, for example, din dana uda ishtavana, or towards the end of Kol Nidre, lo nidre is exactly what we have here. No, I should be down here. Yeah. This again, familiar from the Ravel Kaddish and from other settings. It is essentially an expansion. And we'll see it on the second page, expanded further. If I can get this in focus. Here we are. So we had before the sequence. Finally getting up to the dominant and the cadence. So what else? Yes, the Meshorim come back with octaves here. Nam pam shemei rabo, to emphasize these words. And we see also thirds here. So we have two singers at Be'olemo. So one is going la da 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 da, and the other is going da 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 da. And again, here we have a fifth. The Offenbach Akdamut has a very striking passage similar to this at the very opening. And again, it's not clear if these two singers are going to be singing unisons the rest of the way up and just diverging on these four marked notes, or if the Meshorim will be doing something else here. Okay.
Daniel,
Yes.
Danny, I'd like to interject one thing, because you mentioned the Ravel Kaddish. I actually gave a paper on it a long time ago. Maybe I'll do it here. The Ravel Kaddish is the key to really understanding all the sources that we have for the Kaddish in West European, in East Europe. But could I look at the bottom of this document? Yeah, could you scroll it down further?
I'm sorry, the volume of this is 6. This is
that Yit Gadal. Could you just get to the bottom of that?
Oh, the bottom of the Yit Gadal. Here.
Go further up. I think it's the bottom of the previous page. Yeah, the bottom of the previous page.
There.
No, leave it here. If you look at the fourth line from the bottom, third line.
Third measure.
Yeah.
Yes.
Daniel, let me demonstrate this. That's identical to the Ravel also. This is how the Ravel
yes. In both cases.
So
yeah.
That's just another indication of the old Kaddishim that Ravel was actually borrowing from.
Yes.
We can expand on it some other time.
And this is, I mean, the Musaf Kaddish is one place where it really is still sometimes done and almost expected in some congregations, where it doesn't seem out of place to do this. There was a lot more of it in the 19th and in the 18th century. Let's listen to this now. La, la,
Yisgadal Shanei Rabo Leolemo. Divaroch Yerusei, another one of these Phrygian cadences. V'yamalech malachusei. Mechayechon u'v'yomechon u'v'chayei nechol beis Yisroel. V'imru omin yesh mirabo mevorach yisborach v'yishtabach v'yispoeh v'yisromam v'yisnaseh v'yishador v'yisale v'yishalol shemei dekudsho berichu. Le'elo u'le'elo Mikol bichoso v'shiroso tush bichoso v'nechemoso. Damiron bi'olmo Veimru Omen.
Now we move, I could say literally, from the sublime to the ridiculous. We're going from southern Germany to Denmark. There is in the Birnbaum collection a document, actually there are two documents from Denmark. There is a printed book with liturgical information about the community in the city of Aarhus, about the reforms there and what was expected of the Chazan and the congregation. And then there was a songbook. Now, they didn't have any professionals. They had a businessman from Altona, which is today part of Hamburg, but then was part of Denmark. And he went to Aarhus, and he opened up and supported a congregation. He hired a young singer to make melodies that would be pleasant and accessible. And this is what he came up with. This is from my article, When Kol Nidre is Not Kol Nidre, and I'll show you very soon what this title means. Lechu Nranod Ladonoi Nore Yoletzo Yishenu, and Shiru Ladonoi Shir Chodosh Shiru Ladonoi Kol Ha'oretz. The segol here is transliterated as an A in this the style of Hebrew pronunciation. And number C, Adonai Moloch Togel Ha'oretz Yismechu Im Rabim. So he has a psalmody-like melody that he made up that they use for Psalms. These are the Kabbalat Shabbat Psalms, but for other texts, including the full Kaddish and including Kol Nidre. And as far as I can tell, the reason they're using these texts for the full Kaddish and the Kol Nidre is that these are long texts. So they get through them by taking these melodies and repeating them however many times may be necessary. Kol nidre ve'asorei v'achromei v'konomei v'chinuvei v'kinusei u'shvuos dintano udishtvano udachrimno Usane anafsho sono mi yom kippurim za ad yom kippurim habo oleinu letovo kulhon ichrat nobhon kulhon hon shoron Shvikin, Shvisin, Betelin, Votolin, Lo Shririn, Lo Kayomin, Nidro no lo nidre, Vasoro no lo asore, Ushvuosono lo shvuos. So that was called Nidre in Aarhus, Denmark, 200 years ago. Birnbaum thought, well, maybe these reforms had some influence on Solomon Sulzer. I doubt it very much, because Sulzer is so musical and maintains Jewish tradition, whereas here they're throwing everything out. But I think these reforms may have had some effect on Sulzer's rabbi, who was born in Copenhagen, and may well have been aware of what was going on in Aarhus as well. Now, I'll show you a couple more things here. Baruch hu as Adonai ham vavoroch. Baruch Adonai
hamvoroch l'olam vo'ed. Baruch Adonai hamvoroch l'olam vo'ed. That's the Baruch Hu, no nusach whatsoever, and then you get the brachot. Baruch ata Adonai hamariv arovim, Amen, and Baruch ato Adonai ohev amo Yisrael, Amen. Now we get a Shema Yisrael. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. That's really no worse than what we sing in shul today. And the Lechadodi, as I mentioned, is also usable if you change the transcription. Shomo v'zochor b'dibur achad, hishmi'onu el hamiuchad, Adonai achad ushmo achad, l'shem u'l'sifaras v'l'ishilo, l'chol dodi l'ikras kalo, pnei shabos nekablo, l'chol dodi l'ikras kalo, pnei shabos nekablo. So that is Orhus, a congregation that has no connection to Nusach whatsoever. And now we have just two pieces left, both by master cantors and composers. We start off with Isaac Offenbach, and we look at his Akdamut. We're going to look at the end of the Akdamut. I'm going to play the last movement of Akdamut, I can say. And you see it is a march. The Akdamut is divided into 8 movements: adagio, allegro, tempo di minuetto, and a march at the end. It is for Meshorarim. Now the letters in the boxes indicate the Meshorim. C is the cantor, B is the bass, Z is the zinger in Yiddish. These, however, are my markings, not Offenbach. There is only one marking in the manuscript for a zinger, and everything else I have deduced. This is a very typical bass motive, and here you have a zinger doing an arpeggio, the bass filling in a rhythm. In the recording, I'm not going to try to sing 3 voices simultaneously. The recording is from the European Cantors Convention in Prague in 2018. I am singing just the cantor's part and playing the Meshorim on the piano. So you'll also hear from the range of the piano what is the zinger and what is the bass. And I'm singing here on the non-vocalized syllables. By the way, Jeffrey confirms from his study of Meyer Esslingen that is at least what he was using. And oh yes, 2 more things to point out here. Well, maybe more than that. Here is a cadence where you have 2 voices that are implying harmony, and maybe you had more Meshorim filling in that harmony, but you have a very clear cadence. Here you have a pedal point. We saw a pedal point in one of the Lechado D settings. So this is what I call a lower pedal point or a bass pedal point, while presumably the cantor is singing the melody above. And again, we have the same melody above repeated here. So maybe we should have the same pedal point repeated here, even though it's not notated. I'll just point out also the word painting. Bekarno hi menagach, we're talking about the great ox that is goring with its horns And you can hear that in the music of the march. This is also a cantorial march in 4/4 time. In cantorial music of this time, it is not self-evident that a march will be in 4/4 time. We have a number of marches in 3/4 time, but here we're in 4, and we're going to hear the battle and the goring of the ox. This is the last piece that we're going to look at now. It is a mimkomcha, and this will be published in Musica Judaica in 2021, together with some other examples of mishorim and seasonal motives from this manuscript. It is a very typical virtuoso cantorial piece. We've got, again, a 2-octave range. We have very instrumental figurations. You can see all of these cadenza-like figures. Here's one that's even marked cadenza. There are implied mishorim even without the indication for mishorim, because it says cantor here. So if this is the cantor, either he's trying to emphasize that the mishorim are not singing here, or the mishorim were singing immediately before. Now, I doubt this is the mishorim. Maybe this is, or maybe they were joining in on the chord. Again, I really don't know. Once again, here we have a tempo cantor. And we have an allegretto, a tune. The only text we have, enenu tir ena, comes at the allegretto. We don't know how the text is apportioned within this setting. We will have a hint of a havarabah. La da da da, la da 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 da, na 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 dam, la da na 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 nam. Or maybe this should apply to the end. I don't know, but just a little hint of it. So let's, yes, Adagio giusto con preludio, a preludio polonais, whatever that might mean, is the first part of it, and then we get the allegretto and, oh yes, and the allegretto in minor, and then in major. Excuse me. La na 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 na. Dal segno la So we do have a shifting tonal center. We're ending in A. We have the maggiore on the dominant of D, but we've been in C. Well, we started really tonicizing A, ending on G, and going into C here. So it's a very interesting mixture of tonal centers and cadences. I'm going to stop the screen share at this point and just, to conclude the discussion of these pieces, point out, we've seen a very wide variety of pieces in a number of different styles, very virtuosic, very instrumental, some of them short, some of them very long, a few melodies that can work in a congregation, the Chadodi from Aarhus. The Offenbach Akdamut is about 11 minutes. It's the only extant setting of every couplet that the cantor sings, and it is usable. I've done it in congregations. You have to get a couple of good singers to help you, but it works if you have a congregation that takes Akdamut seriously. And it also includes the melodies that we know are there in the middle of it. One of the things that we've lost really is the ability to mix so much free material together with our nusach, the way they did as a matter of course in the 18th and 19th century. And I would hope that our further studies of this period will help us to understand how that worked and what we can do. I will conclude now just by talking very briefly about my research. I have published 6 articles that deal with the 56th century. The first one is called A Prolegomenon to the Study of Music with Meshorerim, in which I looked at manuscripts that are marked for Chazan, Bas, and Zinger, and analyzed the musical situations in which the singer, the singer and the Bas are used, and try to deduce from that how we can use the Meshorerim in manuscripts where they aren't marked. Another article dealt with the history of Akdamut from Mount Sinai to the year 6000. I started with Mount Sinai because, well, Akdamut is not strictly speaking a Mount Sinai melody, but it is one of our most traditional melodies. I looked at metrical melodies, so and others that were also used together with these, and in the appendix compared the non-metrical Akdamut melody to Gregorian chant, and that is a very interesting comparison. Music that escaped talks about music, and the idea is that collections like the Birnbaum collection, the Offenbach collection, if they had stayed in Europe during the Shoah, they would have been lost. So they escaped. And this was for a festschrift for one of my doctoral advisors, Professor Alexander Zilbiger, who himself escaped from the Shoah when his family fled from Holland. It's transcriptions of a Loamut by Hirsch Weintraub and the Akdamut by Offenbach. So if you want the music for the Akdamut, it's in that article. In the appendix, I talk about the name Kashtan. Everybody says it means redhead, so I thought I'd look it up in a Russian dictionary or a Yiddish dictionary and write in a footnote it means redhead. My footnote turned into a 10-page appendix.
Daniel?
And yeah.
Daniel?
Yeah.
We're sort of running out of time.
I know, two more minutes and I'll be done.
You can supply a list of your publications so everybody can have it.
Okay, just 2 more to mention. An article in German, which gives a transcription of a Mim Komcha by Kashtan, and the Mim Komcha that we just saw will be forthcoming, is not published yet. Most recently, A Chestnut, a Grape, and a Pack of Lions, which discusses a humorous incident in the life of Kashtan. Hirsch Weintraub wrote a biography of his father in Hebrew in 1875. It's an early piece of Hebrew biography. It appeared in 10 installments in a weekly newspaper. Almost half a century after Kashtan's death, gives you an indication of how famous he still was. And in this case, he was invited to be a guest cantor. The local cantor tried to show off and gathered all the Meshorim he could find and screwed up Friday night royally. without being aware of it at all. So I would be happy to give you a list of my publications. I'm not quite sure how. Maybe we could. Geraldine, I can't hear you. Unmute.
Daniel, I think the best would be maybe if you just put your email in the chat.
Yes.
So people could reach out to you.
I will put my email in the chat, and
if you also send me all your publications, we will write it together with the report and everybody will be able to find them. It'll
okay,
be really
very good.
Thank you. Please do that.
So I'm also going to put one more thing in the chat. This goes back about a month or so to the presentation that Jack Kessler and Yalda Rebling did. We were talking about getting congregations to sing along with Nusach, and I mentioned Max Wahlberg, who was Boaz's colleague at JTS and Jack's teacher and my teacher, and he wrote a book, Yachad B'Kol, which gives, he calls it congregational recitatives with, cantorial recitatives with congregational refrains. So you teach the congregation 2 or 3 measures of Nusach, and you sing a refrain, you sing a recitative around that, and the congregation repeats it. So I'll just put the name of that in the chat. Okay, I'm open for questions now.
I'd like to, I followed the chat, and I'd like to address some of those together in one, in sort of a one comment, not all of it. First of all, let me start with what you just ended with, which is the Akdamut. I just think that people need to understand that there is a difference between the Akdamut, what we call Akdamut, and a seasonal tune. The Shalosh Regalim in the festivals, Sukkot, we have the Na'anuim, that's a seasonal tune, which we apply to different texts. In Pesach, it's Adirhu, which we apply. And in Shavuot, it's the that's a seasonal tune.
Yes.
It's also used for Akdamut, but not really the Akdamut thing. What you're calling the Gregorian chant, that I suspect is actually a free-floating motif of the Shalosh Regalim, because we find it in all sorts of other places of the Shalosh Regalim. But that's the end. In terms of some of the comments, hold on, let me get back to this. Let me start with again, I tend not to speculate too much, but we can see that some of this stuff is either a cantorial fantasia, like Jeffrey and Aveneri pointed out, and some of it probably is the Chazan bass linger. I have to say that in other examples in this manuscript, it does indicate Chazan or bass or zinger. We also have historical documentation. There is a book by Ruth HaKohen from Hebrew U, who wrote the music libel against the Jews, and she actually brings sources, anti-Semitic sources, who describe this habit in very sarcastic tone. They're saying, oh, there's this stupid boy who is trying to sound like a flute, and it's ridiculous, and there's bass, etc. So we have at least some textual references to those things. All in all, we don't really, and that's at least explains some of it. Regarding the Nusach in general, we have to make sure we understand that this is actually an exception. Rachel, somebody said about, that the Jewish music sounded like the music of wherever it was. This is, of course, does sound like pre-classical German music, if you care. But when it comes to 19th century and onwards, it's actually typical of the Ashkenazi Jewry to not sound like their environment. If we examine not these sources which do sound like classical music, we examine the Nuschat Tfilah the way we know it from 19th century onwards, it's very different from their environment. And we know that the Ashkenazi Jews made it a point to be separated from their environment. And also from the anti-Semitic sources, we know that they describe this music as noise, Raub. And so it was actually very separated from its environment. Yeah, we don't know what the kind of davening, so to speak, happened in the 18th century, but I think that this does not necessarily represent what the straight davening was. It could also be just all sorts of notebooks of the cantors who wrote private notations from them. There was a question if the text was implemented on the music, and Mark made a very interesting experiment to just add stuff to this, but in all likelihood, I think it was not, because I think it was either a cantorial fantasia, which was done on a vowel, or it was Chazan, the bass and zinger, who were trying to imitate instruments. Some support for this we find from the very Kaddish there, because it has all the words of the Kaddish under the music, and so we know at least parts of it was the words, and whatever in between was not, because it does cover the entire text. What it was, again, cantorial fantasia, or the Chazan bass singer, etc. The half Kaddish that we sing before Musaf, yes, it's very similar. As you were talking about it, I was considering maybe to give a session on this origins of this entire Kaddish, because we know how to trace back almost every the motifs into other half Kaddishim of the old stuff. Yes, the fact that it sounds like Mozart, it sounds like Beethoven, it sounds like this aria or that aria, that's not necessarily important or surprising, because it sounds like sort of pre-classical music. I think that's what I have to say overall about the comments. Go on. If there are other questions addressed to Daniel, then let's do it now.
Okay, maybe I'll respond to what you just said.
Go ahead.
First of all, yes, there are reports about what the Meshurim sounded like. The most famous is by Charles Burney, who was being facetious in a way. He also understood that he was looking at something from a different culture. And at the same time, he was making fun of it, but also stepping back and saying, well, this must have some other meaning to them. And Ruth HaKohen has a wonderful analysis of his remarks in particular. Regarding how representative all of this is a very big and very important question, because we don't know, to what extent things were written down at all, and what we have is just the result of chance of what happens to have been saved. But Israel Adler already pointed out in the preface to Rizim that it's not to be expected that they would be writing down their normal daily nusach. What they're writing down is something unusual that they needed notes for, they needed to remember, and is that this was a memory aid for themselves. So not all the details are there, just enough to jog their memories. And, they'd never thought that we would be here trying to make some sense of this. As for the words of the Fantasia, I think maybe Jeffrey can say if this is right or not. But my sense is that in a cantorial Fantasia, you have to have the words in order to distinguish the different sections of text and to separate where you're actually singing the liturgy from where you're going off on an instrumental, like an instrumental vocalese.
I think you're absolutely correct there. All choral fantasias have text. They're key texts, like the Kaddish, the Avot. They're all. They don't. Cantorial fantasia doesn't exist without a text.
Thank you.
Well, no, but the question is whether all the notes that are in the Fantasia are all of them represent words, or we have words, and in between we have vocalises.
Oh, absolutely, yes. Of course.
That's what I meant.
Okay.
So what else is in the chat? Yes.
I can check, but I think that there was not that much.
I think Baruch Cohen is trying to say something, but you're on mute. You're on mute. Yes.
All right. I want to add a detail about the name Kashtan.
Yes.
My family name in Russia was Kazhdan, and my father and his brothers, when they came to this country, took the Hebrew name instead, which got misspelled on Ellis Island. But the name Kazhdan was interpreted as Kohanim Shluchim Derachmona Ninhu. It's an abbreviation.
Oh, that's interesting. Can you give that to me again? I want to write that down.
Kohanim Shluchim.
Yes. I'm sorry?
Shluchim.
Shluchim.
Derachmona.
Yeah.
Ninhu.
Hmm?
Ninhu.
Ninhu.
Yeah.
Okay, that's very interesting. Thank you.
There was one comment about East and West. Maybe I can address it briefly. I mean, yes, this probably represents, this particular volume is from West Europe. I mean, we know who the sources are. When it comes to after that, when it comes to Nusach Ashkenaz, it gets very complicated because we don't quite know where the borderline between 19th century East and West Europe. Avineri asked that it was the Elba, and there is probably the German-speaking versus the Yiddish-speaking, etc. But we also know that beginning in the 19th century, cantors started to travel a lot. There was also different training to them and the different practices and where they were, etc. So in terms of West and East, yes, I think when it comes to the volume 6, we can pretty much assert that it was West European, but we should be careful with not drawing this conclusion to everything else, because once we get to the davening as the way we know it, not this pre-classical material, the East European versus West European becomes pretty blurry. There are a few places where we have definitely two different versions, but a lot of the times it's just different style, different variants, and we're not quite able to figure out which source is really representing whether it's East or West because of all this back and forth. Yeah, that's it for me.
Okay. Yeah.
Charles wanted to say something.
Thank you.
Charles?
Two questions. I have a comment and a question. Comment is, we had a Chazan Weintraub in Toronto years ago, Oliver Sholem. He had ginger hair, and he was known as Kashtan because Kashtan is the same word as chestnut. That's number one. Number two, Boaz or someone drew attention to the fact that there was a Malchutecha in the list of songs connected with L'chadodi. Can you clarify where this Malchutecha is actually in the Siddur?
Daniel?
I'm assuming it's Mariv.
Well, it says Umalchuto. It doesn't say Malchutecha. Umalchuto, what's it say here? Can you Boaz identified it?
No, because there are some versions when it says Malchutecha beratzon kiblu aleim.
Oh, I see. Thank you. I'm looking at the Ashkenazi. Maybe I should look up Nusach Sfard or something.
I would like to comment.
Very good. Thank you.
I would like to comment about
Elio Schleff.
Yeah, I would like to comment about that. מלכותך ראו בניך בוקע ים לפני משה, זה אלי ענו ואמרו. That is the text. And it was quite common for Chazanim to sing this Malchutcha, not only in the Ashkenazi, but also in Sephardic tradition. In Sephardic tradition, it is Ra'u vanim gevurato, shibchu v'adu lishmo. And this was an introduction for Micha Mocha, which was never sung until the 19th century, or perhaps the end of the 18th century. People did not sing Micha Mocha Ba'elim Adonai. And in the 19th century, they started to sing it, and it became a hymn in the Reform movement. It became an essential piece of congregational singing, like the Shema. But that was a very innovation of Reform movement. And until this very day, if you go to an Orthodox synagogue, the Chazan can sing much before Michamocha, but he stops before Michamocha, and the congregation just mumbles Michamocha, never really sings it. So this is Malchutcha Ra'u Banecha Bokei Hayam Lifnei Moshe, which was celebrated in Chazanut in many Ashkenazi tradition, just as Ra'u Vanim Gevurato, the parallel one, was celebrated in music by the Sephardi congregations.
Thank you.
I would like also to say something about the problem of Lecha Dodi and other pieces like that which don't have any text to them. And I know that each one of the people who try to research that, and I'm sure Boaz and Daniel and some others have tried very hard to somehow perform these melodies with the texts, and it doesn't work out. And the question is, what was the real way of doing it? And Daniel, you alluded to it, and also Boaz, and that's a very important question. And it seems that they may have practiced like in Hasidic places where they did the same Malchutcha over whatever Lecha Dodi in Nusach, and then sang a melody to that without words. Now, usually we try to think that the idea of textless melodies is a Hasidic one. It turns out that it's much older, and it is a Chazanic practice, and the Hasidim just took it over and made a new ideology out of it. So I think that the research, the forthcoming research, will have to answer this question. And I am I do suspect that we'll find roots of Hasidic melodies in these cantorial pieces.
I just want to comment, I'm not sure, but it seems to me that it could be that they did not take it and make it an ideology. They had the ideology first, and then they adopted this practice to fit the ideology.
Boaz, can you repeat? I didn't hear you well. There is some background noise.
Somebody is speaking, okay, I'll repeat that. I'm saying that it could be that the Hasidic practice of the la, etc., they did not have it first and then adopted it to their ideology. They had the ideology first, and this practice fit it very well.
Mm-hmm. I would say the opposite, but you are entitled to your opinion, of course.
No, look, I mean, it's hard to tell anyway, and I am very comfortable with not knowing rather than speculating something, but it's possible.
Eli, I'm wondering if it was the custom to sing something with the plain nusach first, and then to sing a wordless chant.
Yeah.
Wouldn't we have even fewer pieces in the
and fewer pieces?
There are some pieces that have some words, and there are some pieces that have more words.
No, that when they have words, you know where the words are, and that's especially in the cantorial fantasia. But not only that, some pieces have words, and you can trust that that's the way they sang it. But when it comes to pieces like these Lecha Dodis, which are kind of in proto-sonata form, and very instrumental, and sometimes like minuets and things like that, the question is, what do you do with the words?
Yeah.
And my suspicion is that they sang in nusach. That's the way the Hasidim used to do it. How did Hasidim practice the Chazan had to say the nusach, and then there was a need for a melody, for a new melody. So in the case of Hasidim, since the melodies were congregational singing, in not in the tish, but in the service itself,
Mhm.
then sometimes the Chazan would say the text in Nusach, and the congregation would sing the melody without text. That happens a lot in Bratslav, in the old Bratslav Hasidim style. In this case, the Chazan had to take both parts, namely to sing the Nusach and then probably to sing the textless melody for the entertainment of the people. So, for instance, we have in Friede, Friede's Hakafot song, Ozer Dali Moshiana. He has a melody which goes ram pa pa pam pa pa pam pam pa ram pa pa pam pa ram pa ram pam ram pa ram ta ram tam ta tam ta yam ta yam ta ra ram tam ta ram ta ram ra ram da ra tam ta ra la ra da ra da ram ta, etc. And then I would think that he said it without words, sing it, and then he said, "Oh no, Moishi, oh no," something like that.
I just wanted to comment since Eli is here, and I almost forgot. Eli, you presented in a conference, and I'm not sure that you wrote it down, an attempt to look at some modern or at least newer arrangements and try to trace back how it relates to Chazan-based singer.
I try to do that, and well, of course, I'm not the only one. Daniel has written a lot about how to do that. He tried to do it in his great article about that. And I did in Shalom Friede's some pieces and try to imagine, but it's only a figment of an imagination. I cannot prove anything how they sang it.
I made the opposite. I recall you looking at pieces that are already harmonized, that have several voices in more modern settings, and from there trace it back to which part.
That's what I try to do. But even so, the product in general, which I did, the arrangements which I did, is I imagined how they did it.
Well,
I took different pieces from other pieces, and I imagined. I don't think that I can prove that that's exactly what they did.
Of course not. No, that's why we should be comfortable with not knowing everything.
Excuse me?
Oh, I said we should be comfortable with not knowing everything. What we don't know, it's better to acknowledge that we don't know. And
yeah, you have to use lots of imagination to create such arrangements. That's all I can say.
Yeah, well, we don't have a choice. There is just so much that we really do not know. That's the problem.
But it's worthwhile.
This field.
The exercise is really worthwhile doing.
Okay, Geraldine, I think you can sort of put a close on this.
Okay, I think that this conversation between Eli and Boaz and Dan is so enlightening.
As far as I know, there is no water filter.
I hope that you will come back together, the three of you perhaps, think of a subject that you want to discuss, and we will drink in your information and your opinions, because this is very precious to us. Thank you so much, Daniel, for your wonderful presentation, to Boaz for pointing it in directions so expertly. So thank you so much. I'm just going to say what's coming next, because we're not finished with the series yet for this year. We are in December, but we have a couple of wonderful COZs to come. Next week, Jeff Janesko will be talking to the amazing composer David Amran. And David is 90 years old, and we really want to drink up whatever he is able to say to us and show us, and to hear some of his music. So that'll be wonderful. The next week, Agnes Corey is talking about Hungarian Jewish musicians who were affected by the Holocaust. And this is her special subject, and she'll be talking to David Fligg about it. And then we finish off this session, this 2020, with a composer in focus, where we're talking to Michael Shapiro, who's talking to Elliot Forrest. And we open next season in January with Eliyahu Schleifer, talking again to Naomi Konzentner. And we have some amazing talks coming up. Yalda Riebling will be talking to Jacqueline Chernett. Baruch Cohen is talking to Edelson's great-grandson, who's going to be on our COZ program. So there's lots to come, which I will post to all of you. I hope you're all on our email list, which I think Laurie put at the very beginning of the chat today. No, he didn't. But if you want to send your email address, there is a form to fill it in. But also, if you join our Facebook group or you join our forum at Humanities Commons, we will always be in contact with you directly that way. So may I just come to Mark, who will wrap up our session for today. Mark.
So a big thanks again to a wonderful presentation. There's just a handful of us who are doing the research in this work, and to have everyone together, to have Jeff Goldberg, Eliyahu Schleifer, and Boaz and Daniel all together in conversation is really terrific. And I just marvel that, you know, this technology exists, that we could do this. It's still, it's still I'm grateful and amazed at it. And just want to say to everyone that as these conversations get richer and richer, please share your ideas with us, what you would like to present, the conversations you'd like to have. And we really will do our best to try and develop this. And we're thinking about developing other opportunities for conversations as well. So just a big thank you. And, you know, as the saying goes, we've just begun this conversation, and we hope for more conversations to continue. Thank you very much.
See you all. See you next week.